My name's Jim Mitchell. It's actually November the 19th, 1999, and that's my newest, so-called newest drilling rig. It was built in 1928. It's a Greene cable tool spudder, and I've got all the accoutrements with it, the doghouse and winch truck, water tank, and so forth. It's a lot smaller than the other one that I grew up on. The only thing I can tell you about this rig is that in 1928, it was built by a couple of brothers named Greene. They worked for one of the drilling rig companies down in Wichita Falls, Texas, and my understanding is that they broke away from that company and built this rig. This was the first one, the first prototype. It's a double pole rig, 3x5 pole. Actually, the crown shift is a little different than it was some 45 years ago when my grandfather was having the guys that owned it at that time drill wells. That's a crown shift out of a Keystone, which was probably built about 1905 to 1910 or so. I added all that from that point up. Kind of an interesting rig, actually, because it was used around this area from probably the late 40s on, around the Bartlesville area. It's right now it's sitting in Nowata County. Not really sure where to start. I've done so many things to this rig. These tools, there's the swivel rope socket, for example. This is what you call your string of drilling tools. And then the drill stem itself, which goes down and screws onto the drill bit. The way these bits are sharpened is you use a forge and a sledgehammer. The forge is heated by crude oil, and get the bit red hot, set it out on an anvil, and of course I have an old drilling anvil right there. You get it red hot, and then you use a sledgehammer and just beat the thing. You just keep beating it until you get it the right diameter, or the diameter desired, whether right or wrong. And to accomplish that, use a bit gauge, which I have one right here. You see, that's a good 12-inch bit there. My idea is to drill a water well for a good friend of mine, Fred Thompson, who bought this acreage from my father about 15 years ago. And then I'm going to go over to my farm across the field where the tree line starts and possibly clean out some old oil wells and maybe even drill a new one. You can see there's quite a bit to the draw works and all. It's a standard A-frame type system. Instead it's just percussion system. It just raises and drops tools. That's all it is. It just keeps chiseling away, and generally you run about 5 feet, and then you run what's called the baler. The baler is a piece of pipe right there. Once you drill usually a 5-foot run, then pull your tools out and run the baler, pull it back out, and then put the cuttings in this tube, which we call a dump box, which goes out and comes out the end right there, and then goes out onto the ground. Or with the EPA regulations nowadays, into a pit. But anyway, I'm just going to make a walkthrough of the rig. Now these are what we call tool joint wrenches. You can see they're massive wrenches, about 6 feet long, and that's what you use to screw the tools together or take them apart, chains, bits, whatever. And you can see there's a flat there that the wrench goes on. And maybe, hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to do something with that. Because I need to screw that swivel socket just a little bit tighter. I don't want it coming off on my head because there are quite a few tons of iron hanging there. Anyway, this is what we call a circle track. Here's the track here, kind of a half circle, and there's the jack. And what you do is you just step over here and take the jack. See if I can do this with one hand, not shadow it to death. And just move the jack back and forth. It's a pretty slow process, really labor intensive, but of course, as this rig was built, you could get a good tool pusher and a good driller for about $9 or $10 a piece per day. There are 3 lines on this rig. This is what we call the casing line. Casing line runs up, goes up the mast, and over one of the lower sheaves, and down to this hook, and use it just to pick things up, run pipe in the well, run casing, pull casing, just basically just sort of a work line, almost like the equivalent of a winch line, and that's the draw works for it. This is what we call a bull wheel here. And the main shaft, which of course it isn't a friction clutch here, you have a jaw clutch for the casing line. And then you go over to the next clutch, which if I can get up here, and the next clutch actually runs Spudder, and which powers that great big sprocket there. And of course you've got the arm, which makes it go up and down. It's really hard to explain unless you fire the rig up. Next one over is a sand line clutch, which goes to the sand line drum, which runs the baler up and down. And that, of course, is the clutch with some 1905 patent dates on it, actually. That's the clutch for the drill line, which is back here. And as you can see, I don't have much drill line either. But this one's a V-belt drive. Now, when I found this thing, it didn't have an engine. And I put that engine on there. That's a late 50s model 6-cylinder Oliver tractor engine, which also now is an antique. It took me forever to find all the parts to get it going. And this thing still needs a paint job, make it look a lot better. I didn't have any guy wires, so I ended up stripping line off the rig. Again, this rig was built, I believe, in 1928, and it was on a Model A Ford truck originally, but then in the late 40s, the man that had this, W.D. Coldren, who was a good friend of my grandfather's, put it on a fifth wheel system so he could pull it around with a winch truck. Back to the sand line thing, I stripped all the sand line off for guy wires except for a few hundred feet, which you can see in there. And that's basically all I need for this project. I plan to drill a water well here, and there should be fresh water here at approximately 20 feet. I might drill down as far as 60 since there are some lower sands that might even be good enough to drink. It's hard to say. This throttle is a menagerie, but it seems to work. The throttle, just unlatch it, and then you just turn the throttle, speed it up or slow it down. Got a lock on it. Hopefully, it'll lock down. There it goes. This so-called steering wheel here is to use to spool the line back and forth. See, I can turn the steering wheel here. If you can see that shim on the back side turn. I can get it a little closer than I can. Move? I think it moved. And this thing generally ran on natural gas, but since there's not a gas well nearby, I rigged up a propane tank on, hence the throttle cable sticking out over the wheels. For draw pins, I just took some axle shafts out of an old pickup truck, and it seemed to work okay. I also built that boom, the boom outrigger, that outrigger, which has a chain hoist, which is just another method to move things around. I built that out of an old polish rod out of an oil well on a piece of 2-inch pipe, but it swivels and it works okay. I'm really tired. I've had a long day trying to fix this thing for hours. Anyway, of course, I've got a doghouse. Now, I have the original doghouse for this thing too. My dad made that out of an old bolted oil tank in 1965, I believe. Turnbuckles. Turnbuckles are off old Oklahoma pump jacks or pumping units, mechanical pump jacks that pump the wells up and down after they were completed. As you can see, it's typical cable tool setup. It's a mess. The floorboards are kind of interesting. The floorboards came from the same people that owned this rig. It's an old wooden oil tank. You notice they have a little bit of taper in the boards, and they're really great because they last forever. That's old redwood. It isn't very hard like oak, but makes a really good floor and good almost waterproof, but definitely water-resistant floor. The way you set this thing up is you have the winch truck sitting in front of the drilling rig. Run the winch line from there underneath the rig. It goes the length of there and then dead ends on the back of the rig. Of course, this mast is laid over 90 degrees from what it is and sits in that carriage. And then you use the winch line, you tie it on to that point to extend the telescoping mast. I've got it set on low pole. Low pole, the mast is 42 feet high. So you can see someone has dropped the mast at one time. That's why it's bent. I don't know if you can see it's got a little bow in it. It's not bad, but there is some bow in it. But it'll still drill a straight hole, I hope.